Vivek Ramaswamy in the great state of Iowa. Now, he's painting the entire state, left and right, north and south. He's going all over the place, and he's trying to drum up some people to get to the caucus for him on Monday. Right now, he's not looking great in the polls, but, on a caucus, anything can happen, especially with the weather report showing that it's going to be about 4 below. Now that Chris Christie's out of the equation, well, you never know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen. That's right. I'm one of the only political pundits who's coming out in front of you and actually saying, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I'm assuming Trump's going to win, but we don't know for sure. What we do know for sure is Vivek Ramaswamy is great when he turns the tables on the liberal media. And that's what he did yesterday in a exquisite fashion. Let's watch together.
If this is okay, and I'm just kind of curious on the previous question that you those 4 things that were provably false.
Yes.
And I'm just kind of curious. I know some of these guys, we've been following some of you guys. I'm curious if there's any national media who actually believe that they were.
All right, so a quick setup here. He's got a couple of people that he's campaigning with. They might be state legislators or local politicians in Iowa. And Vivek Ramaswamy made the point of 4 provably false items that the mainstream media has gone nuts with over the last 5 or 6 years, having to do with Trump and Biden and Hunter and all that stuff, right? And he laid out these 4 provably false things. He's about to go through them again. And the question here is, the media reported these things. They are provably false. The media was wrong. Have they ever apologized? Have they ever admitted that they were wrong? So watch what happens.
Actually, it's a good question, Eddie. So Eddie's one of the, you guys are colleagues, 2 of the top state reps here. And I think that's it's a good thing to be curious about. Just by show of hands, who here is willing to admit that the Trump-Russia collusion hoax was indeed incorrectly reported by the mainstream media? Is there anybody here able to admit that was incorrect reporting?
It wouldn't be really appropriate for us to answer a question like that.
Why not? Why would that be inappropriate? I think it would be inappropriate. What's inappropriate is lying to the public.
We're doing our job asking you.
Was the public lied to, or did the media report on the set of facts that were provided?
So that's a fair question. I actually think that the public was lied to long after the media systematically still understood that this was the product of the Steele dossier. The Steele dossier was a piece of Russian disinformation provided by the Hillary Clinton campaign that was served up to the federal government as a basis for issuing a FISA warrant to then potentially infiltrate a member of the opposition party. If this was Bush and Cheney doing it to John Kerry, this would have been the stuff of scandal, impeachment, and worse. And yet, I think it was an intentional lie that the media said that account, which we now know to be true, was actually the Russian disinformation. Now, Shauna, I would be charitable in my interpretation of that if it were just one instance. Let me give an easier one. Just by show of hands, does anybody believe the media's reporting about the origin of COVID-19 ran flatly in face of the facts that you have a Wuhan Institute of Virology that was now the likely origin of the COVID-19 pandemic? You all said that it wasn't for a long time. By show of hands, was the Wuhan lab the likely origin of the COVID-19 pandemic? Everybody, media or not. So you have reported, the same media that has reported that the COVID-19 pandemic did not originate in a lab in Wuhan is willing to even say, unwilling to admit today.
The report came out in 2023, so I guess
it was known that there was a Wuhan Institute of Virology where they were conducting gain-of-function research, the very city which was the origin of a global pandemic. And yet the media's explanation was that somehow it could have been any source other than actually having started in a lab.
Yeah, and that I want to. There's more to this, and it is great. And I let it go for a while because it's so pristine and it's so perfect. And the casual nature where he's holding his iced coffee and taking sips as he completely eviscerates and exposes the lying news media. I'm more concerned with the people who refuse to even participate, that they just sit there and they watch. And you heard the first guy say, well, it would be inappropriate for us to respond to your question. We're here to ask you questions. You see how they get away with this? But of course, we know now that their job is not just to ask questions of politicians, because they take it upon themselves to fact check in real time, right? Because they try to own the pristine mantle of the truth. They feel like they're the ones responsible for fact checking politicians. Of course, they only fact check on one side of the political equation. But by taking on the responsibility of fact checking, it's implied that they are the sole possessors of those facts, of that truth, that they're the ones who universally know what the truth of a matter is. And then when they're challenged on the facts of a story that they claimed to have the truth on years ago, and it turns out they were wrong, well, they refuse to participate in that. They refuse to be fact checked. Oh, it would be inappropriate. That's not our job. That's not our job. You see, 6 years ago, if you said to a journalist, if you were campaigning and you said, the entire Russian collusion narrative is false, the Steele dossier is a fake, and in fact, it's a product of Russian disinformation that's made its way into Hillary Clinton's hands during the campaign, and it was then given to James Comey at the FBI, and they scandalously took it and used it for a FISA warrant to spy on the Trump campaign and eventually spy on the Trump presidency. These very journalists in Iowa would fact check you and say that you're peddling in misinformation, that you're lying. But of course, everything that I just said and that Vivek just said is completely true. That's exactly what happened. But now they just want to move on, because the facts have changed. Same thing with COVID. You just heard that reporter say, well, the report about the Wuhan lab didn't come out till 2023. Okay, well, first of all, they buried the report when it did come out, and there were no apologies to Senator Tom Cotton or to Tucker Carlson or to anyone here at Town Hall who was investigating and asking questions about that lab at the time. Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, various conservatives on Capitol Hill who all said, hang on a minute, China is responsible for this thing. They want to tell us that it came from a bowl of bat soup when they've got an Institute of Virology right there in Wuhan. Well, I mean, what are we talking about here? We were all fact-checked. We were called liars. We were called peddlers of misinformation. Oh my, you're talking about that. That's xenophobic. You're going to get Chinese people killed here in the States. There's going to be hate crimes against them. Do you notice how the media always jumps to that conclusion? Where is their brains, right? I mean, you tell me that the COVID-19 virus came from Wuhan, and the last thing in my mind is, oh, well, Chinese Americans are going to get beat up on the street. Of course not. That's ridiculous. Have a little more respect for the American people than that. But of course, the American news media doesn't have any respect for the American news media. So there's two right there that Vivek Ramaswamy lays out for you. Two items, factual bits of information that if he or Ron DeSantis or any person in the mainstream media, any person in the conservative media, right-leaning media, a talk radio host, or yours truly, if I said that 2-3 years ago, I would be shamed. I would publicly be completely lambasted. I would be censored. Our articles or our videos would be demonetized on social media by these very people. And he's got more.
I just think that's systematically unacceptable. The Hunter Biden laptop. Is the Hunter Biden laptop story, as reported by the New York Post, which was shut down, had the Twitter account locked for anybody who is even sharing the story of the Hunter Biden laptop found on the eve of the last election? The media reported that it was Russian disinformation on the eve of that election. Does anyone here agree that the Hunter Biden laptop story, as reported by the New York Post, was indeed accurately reported and was not Russian disinformation, but was in fact a factually owned laptop of Hunter Biden? I mean, you got to, man. I mean, your paper reported it. Does everybody?
Yeah, okay, real fast. The one guy who raised his hand is a New York Post reporter, right? That's what Vivek said. None of the other journalists, even now in this setting, they refused it. Now they're just going to say, well, we're not going to play this game. We're not going to raise our hand. Really? Because last time I watched a Republican debate, that's what the journalists who are moderators constantly want you to do. Okay, everyone raise your hand if you agree with climate change. They always try to box Republicans into this, but they refuse to play the raise your hand game. These are political journalists, and none of them, even at this moment, will admit that the Hunter Biden laptop story wasn't disinformation. Why? Because they'd have to admit how wrong they were. Not just how wrong they were, but how they meddled in the 2020 presidential election. How they willfully altered the results of the 2020 presidential election by lying and accepting the lie and rebroadcasting the lie that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation. Because understand how damaging that lie was. It would have been one thing for them to say, well, this story is being reported by the New York Post. We haven't been able to independently verify it, and therefore we're not going to cover it. No. They didn't do that. They didn't say we can't independently verify this story, so we're not going to promote it. We're not going to talk about it. We'll get our reporters on it. They didn't do any of that. They did the opposite of that. They actually told you that the story was a lie. Now, they never independently verified that it was a lie. They just took for granted this letter that was provided to them that was engineered by the Biden campaign saying that 50 retired members of the intelligence community believe that this is Russian disinformation. That's what they reported to you. They reported a lie to you, and that lie was powerful because that lie not only negated the truth, which was that Hunter Biden is a corrupt criminal and that his father participated in the crimes. It did more than that. It implicated Donald Trump as a peddler of Russian disinformation, because Trump and Rudy Giuliani and other people in the Trump campaign were saying, look at this Hunter Biden laptop story. Look at what's going on here. Look at the crimes involved here. And not only did the lie about Hunter Biden's laptop being Russian disinformation, not only did it kill the truth, but it even peddled an even more important lie that Donald Trump is in the pocket of Vladimir Putin, and he will stoop to no lengths to win this election because he's an authoritarian liar. That's what the media told you 3.5 years ago. And now, today, they still won't admit it.
Anybody else seriously not believe that?
I mean, I believe that Hunter Biden is suing Rudy Giuliani over the laptop, so I don't think so.
So you don't believe, so you think that it actually was the product of Russian disinformation, as was reported by the media? That was the basis for suppressing this at the time.
With the Hunter Biden case, yeah. I'm not sure why we're talking about that.
Because it was election interference on the eve of the last election. And I think there's the same kind of election interference happening this time around. And I think it's happening, the early waves of it, with respect to the treatment of my candidacy. And I think that is likely to be a major problem heading into the next year, unless we're able to openly and transparently acknowledge the mistakes of the past. Without acknowledging the mistakes of the past, I think we are destined for an even more dangerous future. And I do not want to see a repeat of what happened in the 12 to 15 months leading up to January of 2021. I don't want to see that in this country. And I worry we're on a path to far worse than that until we have accountability 360 degrees for the mistakes that were made in that lead up. And the Hunter Biden laptop story and its suppression, Shauna, I do believe was a key part of the lead up to that. I think the suppression of the origin of COVID and the origin of the pandemic was a key part of the lead up to what happened in January of 2021. I think that the systematic suppression of speech in this country, even about debating the lockdowns, was a key part of what culminated in January 6, 2021. And as somebody who's looking to lead this country and hopefully, dare I say, reunite this country, I think it is critical, it is vital to the future of this country that we not repeat those same mistakes. And yet that's exactly what I'm seeing play out in slow motion, hiding in plain sight. And so it's my concern for this country that leads me to run for U.S. president. It's my concern for this country that causes me to raise what aren't some ancient issues to be swept under the rug. I think that history is relevant to what's happening today.
You're muted, Larry.
I'm sorry, I muted myself there. Let me just say this. I don't think Vivek Ramaswamy is positioned right now to win the Iowa caucus or any of the early primaries. I don't know if he's positioned right now to be president or be on the ticket, but I am glad he is in this race. I am glad he is in this campaign. I know some of my colleagues, even conservative media colleagues, don't like him and they're not real happy with his participation. But that performance right there is exactly why I'm glad he's there. And I know for a lot of voters out there, they feel like Vivek Ramaswamy is the only one out there who's actually being frank and real and telling it like it is. And by the way, to that end, one other Vivek Ramaswamy video hit yesterday. He created this one himself. It was after Chris Christie announced that he was dropping out of the campaign. And I think it's kind of relevant. This didn't get much coverage at all. In fact, you probably haven't seen it. I know you haven't seen it on cable news or broadcast news. These are the places who say that they cover politics like no one else. They're covering the presidential campaign, and they've got, millions and millions of dollars worth of investment in Iowa and New Hampshire. And you're going to see all their fancy sets that they've built with all the lighting because they're on the ground. But they've missed this very important story. They didn't cover it at all. And this is coming from one of the candidates. Here, watch.
The system wants to narrow this down to a two-horse race between Donald Trump and a puppet who they can control. And it has become increasingly clear that puppet is not a Democrat. It's not even Gavin Newsom. It's Nikki Haley. It's in our own party. Well, today, one more step in that plot unfolds. Chris Christie drops out. Next up, I'm going to make a prediction. You're actually going to see Ron DeSantis join Nikki Haley's ticket. He's going to be her VP. The whole game, it's hiding in plain sight. Whatever it takes. And this system will stop at nothing. And I mean nothing. To eliminate Donald Trump from contention. It's disgusting. But the same people who have said they're not going to actually take a principled stand against Trump's removal from the ballot. Haley and DeSantis are both in that category. Do the math, people. That's next up. Ron DeSantis is after Iowa. Everybody, including Chris Christie, apparently got a phone call from Ron DeSantis. Panicked was the word that Chris Christie used. This is the way the plot's going. Ron may not know this. Ron DeSantis may not know this, but that's what his donors are going to make him do. That's what's coming next. Ron DeSantis will become Nikki's VP, whether or not Ron knows it. It's not really his choice. He's not the one in charge of that decision. And then the plot continues. We have to open our eyes and not fall into their trap. Our America First agenda cannot end. Our movement cannot end with Donald Trump when they take him out from contention. And if you think this system is going to even let this man get anywhere near the White House, we need to open our eyes.
Now, like I said, this didn't get much coverage, and I guess I can understand why in some cases, because some newsrooms may have said, well, this is just Vivek Ramaswamy going after Nikki Haley again, and he's peddling a conspiracy theory, blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. That's you using your editorial judgment to decide what your readers or your viewers are allowed to see or not, which is a little troubling. Whether you think it's relevant or not, they should still see it. But it seems to me, and I've only been in the news game now after Andrew Breitbart recruited me into this world for about 15 years. But as a broadcaster and journalist, it seems to me that one of the presidential candidates predicting that Nikki Haley will end up being the nominee because Donald Trump will not be allowed to be the nominee, and that Ron DeSantis will be her handpicked running mate. That's kind of newsworthy. That's kind of noteworthy, isn't it? Vivek Ramaswamy yesterday predicted that Nikki Haley will be the hand-selected nominee for the Republicans. Where's that headline? Where's that panel discussion on Jake Tapper's all-important show?